Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Michael Arria. I'm the U.S. correspondent at MondoWise, here for another episode of The Shift. I'm usually joined by Adam Horowitz, editor at MondoWise, but he's off today, and I'm pleased to welcome a frequent contributor at the site. He's on there pretty much every week, Mitchell Plitnick, who is the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy. He's the co-author of Except for Palestine, The Limits of Progressive Politics, and he maintains the Cutting Through newsletter. And he's been writing for us quite a bit lately about the current situation in Iran and the end of the war, Israel, the relationship, Trump, all that stuff. And we're going to get into it today. So Mitchell, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Great to be here.
So I wanted to start with this piece that you just published. I think this came out yesterday. The title kind of is just like a good segue into my question. It's called "The U.S. and Iran Have Struck a Deal to Open the Strait of Hormuz, but Israel May Prevent an End to War." And it's kind of an open secret that Israel is very upset or distraught or not in line with this deal that the Trump administration is apparently about to negotiate. I should point out at the outset here, actually, we're talking on Wednesday. And I know that with the Trump administration, one never knows kind of what will be said or done within any 24-hour period. So by this time this goes up, I should just say we're doing this Wednesday. Trump has actually made some comments today that we might get to later. But we're talking on Wednesday, June 17th. But I wanted to ask you, because we see these attacks on these strikes on Beirut. Obviously, I think most people believe attempt to torpedo this deal before it gets off the ground. There's still in the negotiation process. It's unclear kind of like where we are at that point because we've gone through so many iterations over the last few months. But can you talk maybe briefly about your argument in that piece and how Israel may indeed, although people are declaring it an end to this war, may prevent an end to the war?
Yeah, so I mean, it's important, I think, to understand first of all that this signing that's scheduled for Friday, this memorandum of understanding, is not actually an end to the war. It basically institutionalizes a ceasefire. It puts off a lot of most of the really difficult issues to this 60-day negotiation period that's supposed to start with the signing. So the war is not technically over until there's a final deal, and that final deal is going to be very difficult, even without Israeli interference. It'll be very difficult to come by. So that's one point. Now, when I wrote the piece, I think it was already Sunday night, Monday morning. I was looking at a few days between the announcement of this MOU and when it would actually be signed, and saying that essentially Israel could torpedo it and would try to torpedo it, and it has. It's been launching more attacks in Lebanon, including one in the area of Beirut, that since the MOU was announced. But it has not been able to expand that, more than likely because they know that Trump would hit the roof and might actually do something impulsively that many of us would appreciate, like suspending arms shipments to Israel. Out of anger, if they did something like that. I think Netanyahu has to play this very carefully. He can't just brazenly give Trump the middle finger and undermine. And Iran is conscious of this. Iran knows what's going on. Iran understands that Israel is trying to torpedo the deal, which is why when they struck Beirut on Sunday, Iran did not respond. At the request of the Trump administration, they held back. They understand they're not just going to give Israel what they want. So it isn't that simple, but at the same time, Israel will do anything it can. It has to, because if this MOU is signed, one thing that will happen is that the Strait of Hormuz will be open. Once that occurs, it's going to be very, very, not impossible, but very, very difficult for Israel to drag the United States back to war, because the United States does not want to see the strait closed again. They don't want to see a recurrence of this massive shock to the global economy that we've suffered in the past few months, that they're essentially ending now before it would get to the worst period. I mean, most economists that I've followed that have talked about this say that, getting into July and August would really be when the real shock of the closure would hit. And so getting the strait reopened before those months was crucial, I think, for the Trump administration. They're not going to want to see that closed again. So it'll be very hard for Israel to drag the United States back in. And it's at this point impossible for Israel to convince Trump to do it. They did that once because he was stupid enough to buy the argument that every other president before him had heard and rejected. He was stupid enough to buy it, but now he's seen why all those other presidents rejected the Israeli idea. He's not going to fall for it twice. So the opening of the strait was really for Israel a big deadline.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think one of the reasons why it's clearly not a great situation for Israel. Not only do you see the strikes on Lebanon, but in recent days we've just seen pro-Israel pundits, people like Mark Levin and Eli Lake and John Podhoretz and others just melting down, and pro-Israel think tanks kind of melting down, and having to navigate the situation. And I wanted to kind of use that as a jump-off point to ask you about a big topic. I mean, this is like a $64,000 question. I mean, it's something that I've written about. I know you've written about it. It's an ongoing debate. When this war first began, there was an ongoing debate about whether this was part of like the Trump administration or the U.S. government's broader designs in the Middle East, or if Trump was actually forced into it by Netanyahu. And in my opinion, it can be both at the same time. I mean, it doesn't have to be one or the other. I think it's quite clear that Netanyahu has been pushing for this for decades. I mean, that's public record, but we also have reporting, pointing out he went to the White House, he made these arguments. In recent days, we've seen these interesting comments from Trump, and we just saw some more today, which I referenced earlier. Speaking to reporters early at the G7, he referred to Israel as a very small partner. He had a comment, I think it was yesterday, the day before, you probably saw, where he said something to the effect of, Netanyahu doesn't have to, or Israel doesn't have to destroy a bunch of apartment buildings every time they bomb Lebanon. What's been interesting about Trump, just as someone on the left, is that despite all the horrible things he's done, it has been, his 2 terms have been interesting insofar as he is pretty upfront about what the U.S. empire does, as opposed to kind of the usual like liberal, humanitarian intervention claptrap that we got from other administrations. So like when it comes to partners like Saudi Arabia and Israel, he kind of is very upfront about their relationship and doesn't really mince words. I thought those comments were interesting. And, there's a certain segment of online discourse that really gloms on to whenever Trump says something like this, they identify it as proof that there's some developing rift between the 2 countries. And yet at the same time, time and time again, we saw Trump, as soon as he got into office, kind of, continue to support the genocide there, occupation, apartheid. He hasn't done anything to slow down arms or weapons or anything in that capacity, which we obviously have seen from past Republican presidents, in fact, in some situations. I'm wondering how you assess Trump's comments within that context of what's referred to as a special relationship. What do you think U.S.-Israel relations currently are? And is this just rhetoric? Is everything kind of like operating the same as it always does? We just have like some different public face? Or do you think there's actually something there where we could see a redefinition of the relationship between the 2 countries going forward?
Well, I think we can see a redefinition of the relationship. I don't know that it has much to do with Trump. But I guess I would start with sort of pushing back on the idea that Trump was forced into the war. He was not forced. He was convinced. But he certainly was there was nothing that was pressing Trump into this war that was any greater than press any other president that Netanyahu has made this case to. There was always tremendous agitation. Certainly George W. Bush faced a lot of neoconservative pressure to attack Iran. We know these things have come close to happening a few times in this century, where people were really worried. I was never worried about an attack on Iran until Trump came into office. And the only reason that I was concerned about it with Trump is because he was stupid enough to believe these arguments, but not because I think there's any particular pressure on him to have done it. So I would definitely not say that Trump was forced. I would say he was convinced by Netanyahu that it would be as easy as Venezuela, which anybody who knew anything about Iran knew was a lie. But Trump does not, and neither do, by the way, do most of the people around him. Even the relatively intelligent advisors that he has, somebody like Marco Rubio, who's whatever else he may be, is not an idiot. Um, but does not know the Middle East. He knows nothing about the Middle East. He's very ignorant of Iran, and he believed a lot of the propaganda that you get from his fellow neoconservatives. So you have that sort of Trumpian ego riding high and thinking he could be the one. He could be the one who finally, after 47 years, blah blah blah, confronted Iran and brought down the Islamic Republic. Um, but what I do think is happening is the war has accelerated an already ongoing process where both parties are seeing that the partnership with Israel has not been a good one. And I want to make sure that we characterize this because look, we write often and we talk about the Palestinian struggle. I think the idea that the United States government is going to ever become an ally in the Palestinian struggle is at best naive and at most impossible. It's not going to happen. That doesn't mean that that actually isn't necessarily the goal that Palestine needs. What Palestine needs is for the United States to stop being Israel's bosom companion and allowing Israel. Not just allowing Israel to do what it wants, but enabling Israel to do everything it wants, even when those things are very much contrary to American interests. The United States has, frankly, in when you look at it in a cold sort of realist sense, the United States doesn't have any particular interest in Palestinian liberation, but they don't have any interest in the occupation either. They have no real interest in Palestinian dispossession either, yet they have worked tirelessly to pursue it, often to American detriment. And I think we finally are coming into an era where both Democrats and Republicans and also obviously independents who vote with both parties are realizing that the special relationship is actually a toxic relationship. And that needs to be reset. A normal U.S. Israeli relationship, which there's going to be. The United States and Israel are allies. They're going to remain allies for the foreseeable future. But that doesn't mean that the United States has to enable Israeli crimes. We don't necessarily enable the crimes of other countries. Saudi Arabia, for example, commits horrible crimes. We don't enable them. We ignore them. If we only ignored Israel's crimes, Israel could not commit them. That's the difference between our relationship with Israel and with Saudi Arabia. Without our assistance, Israel could not commit those crimes in the first place. So, I see that shift happening, and I see Trump reacting to it. I see Trump being willing to come out. I mean, some of the things he said in these last few days actually are fairly remarkable. The one you pointed to, I think, that he criticized Israel for every time a drone flies over Israeli airspace, they're leveling apartment buildings. That is something that Democratic and Republican presidents have tolerated for decades. That sort of, and Israel has not made any secret of the fact that that's their strategy. A sort of disproportionate response. They've talked about this publicly. They're not hiding it. They say this is how we will deter any action against us by even the smallest provocation resulting in a massive response. And Trump has said that's not really a good idea, which shouldn't be remarkable, but it is for an American president. So in that sense, the fact that Trump is willing to say those things, I do think is a step forward, but he's only doing it because of the politics that are happening in his own party as well as in the Democratic Party from the ground up.
Yes, absolutely. It seems unequivocal to me that the U.S. and Israel lost this war. I mean, even if we go by the standards, removing the moral component of it, even by the standards the goals that the Trump administration laid out at the beginning of the bombing campaign, they've achieved none of them. I mean, they assassinated their leader, but the government has probably become more entrenched and stronger as a result of that. Trump, the ceasefire thing. I mean, I think somebody pointed out 38 times he claimed they were on the verge of
Yeah.
a ceasefire. And at the end, he fluctuated between consistently like threatening the entire country and threatening annihilation to, hours later, he would say they were close to a deal. It seemed towards the end, the administration was all but begging the Strait to be opened back up. They're unfreezing this money, allegedly. I mean, we're going to go through negotiations again. They're going to go to square one. It seems undeniable that they lost. And it's been interesting. I alluded to this earlier, the fact that pro-Israel pundits, it's been interesting to see them melt down. But there's another part of that side of the aisle where I feel like they've had to cope, where it's like they're trying to twist it. I mean, I see JD Vance out there just trying to twist this into some sort of victory by any means necessary, just completely removed from reality of the situation. I wanted to talk about the other side of the aisle, though, which I'm sure you've seen. I have a newsletter coming out tomorrow where the second section is kind of devoted to this. I was just reading this morning the New York Times editorial board's op-ed on the end of the alleged end of the war. I don't know if you saw this, but they acknowledge. I mean, it's called "Trump Lost the War He Started in Iran." The narrative here throughout this is, the New York Times editorial board laments that the U.S. now looks weak to other countries throughout the world, that they burned through precision missiles, and says one of the problems with Trump is that he isn't capable of preparing for future wars. This is an actual line from the piece. We lay out these facts with no pleasure. Iran has been and remains a force for ill. And I'm also just while I was reading that, I was thinking about these comments we've seen, as you probably also seen, from Democratic establishment Democratic establishment lawmakers, people like Cory Booker, for example, criticizing Trump for being weak, criticizing him for giving back Iran its own money, for, not quote unquote winning this war. What have you made of that? Have you been paying close attention to that? I'm interested, like the reactions to this. We've seen a lot of attacks, I think, from the liberal establishment and from Democrats coming from, as we've seen before, like throughout Vietnam and other places, coming from the right, it seems like.
I think, first of all, I like the way you have framed this as the U.S. and Israel lost the war, which I think is a much better framing than what I've seen some people saying, which is Iran won the war. Iran's results are a mixed bag. Iran has sustained, significant damage. You can't get bombed like that and not sustain significant damage. Not to mention significant loss of life, which I have to say, all of us, the right and the left, frankly, have not paid enough attention to over the course of this war. A lot of Iranians have been killed for absolutely no reason. It really is obscene. But Iran also has gained some things. Their leverage over the Strait, but they've clearly established some deterrence. They've also lost diplomatically. I mean, the progress that was made first by Iraq and then China in bringing Iran closer together with the Gulf Arab states, that's destroyed. Right now, Gulf Arab states are furious with them. Very mistrustful of them. It can be rebuilt, and I suspect it will be. But for now, that's been set back. So there are some real losses. If we were really serious about trying to create a better American foreign policy, Democrats would be looking at those things and saying these things and recognizing who and what Iran is. I don't think we have to romanticize the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic is an authoritarian regime that was unpopular in Iran. Now it's much more popular thanks to the war. But when they're facing some questions as well, because once the war presumably ends, especially if sanctions get lifted, if things don't improve in a hurry, the dissatisfaction in Iran is going to grow very, very quickly. And I think they will have a hard time reacting to it the way they did, for example, in January. If I was in Israel and I was looking at it through their point of view, I would actually encourage Israel to just stand back and see what evolves in Iran, because the current government might find itself under real siege from its own people within a few years. If they don't enact some serious reforms, which they might well do. I mean, again, Democrats should be looking at Iran in a more holistic fashion. They don't seem to worry about again, I'll use Saudi Arabia as an example, that the oppression and the autocracy of Saudi Arabia, when talking about the authoritarianism of Iran, Iran is authoritarian, but compared to the Gulf monarchies, it's far more democratic. Its system is far more democratic. Its system is also far more open to change than the Gulf Arab allies that we have. None of that is reflected in democratic rhetoric. Even progressive Democrats have a hard, still look at Iran as the enemy. And I find that problematic. Mainstream Democrats are, as you pointed out, they're attacking Trump from the right. I saw a tweet from Matt Duss, the vice president of the Center for International Policy, basically begging Democrats to stop doing that, because that's the kind of rhetoric, as he put it, that got us into this war in the first place. And he's right. We're seeing Democrats talking about what are their first reaction was, tell us what the terms are. Why aren't you telling us what the terms are? When actually it was fairly reasonable that until it was officially signed and both sides agreed to publicize it, that the specific terms weren't communicated, and they were leaked. We all knew what was in it. People are hitting Trump for freeing up Iranian money and establishing a reconstruction fund. That is what should happen. Iran has a right, first of all, to their own money, and the reconstruction fund. I mean, we attacked them twice in sneak attacks that were completely unprovoked. And we're not even the ones basically funding those that reconstruction fund, where the entire world is, which I think Trump will probably use to say, look, the world didn't come and help us, so now we're asking them to at least pay for this. I think that's what one of the arguments he will probably eventually put forth. This is typical Democrat, though. We should look back at history and remember, when we talk about the escalation in Vietnam, who escalated it? It was Kennedy and Johnson who escalated the war in Vietnam, even if it might have been seeded by the Eisenhower administration. Eisenhower never intended that kind of American involvement in Vietnam. Democrats and Republicans have been pretty much together for years on sort of an imperial foreign policy. This isn't new. And politically now, it's expeditious for the Democrats to hit Trump on this from the right, which is understandable, but incredibly foolish and counter to what I think most of their voters want to see. It just, once again, stands against a sensible foreign policy, a pragmatic foreign policy, and most importantly, an ethical foreign policy.
And finally, I'm hesitant to even ask a prediction question amid the Trump administration, but I wanted to also reference this piece you did probably about a week ago, when I feel like this was imminent. This would have been June 12th. And this piece, "The time has come for Trump to choose between the U.S. and Israeli interests in the Iran war." And at the end of this piece, you talk about the U.S. You alluded to this earlier, that the difference between Saudi Arabia and Israel is that Israel couldn't carry out many of its actions without U.S. support. And you say that U.S. can obviously stop Israel, but will it? And you quote Trita Parsi, who said, "Without a doubt, just a phone call or some angry quotes to the media is not going to be enough to get Netanyahu and Israel to back down." And we've seen this kind of play out where it's like, every other week, Barack Ravid has a new piece where Trump, before it was Biden, now it's Trump, is allegedly very frustrated with Netanyahu, and all the policies continue exactly the same way. Do you foresee, as we near these negotiations, do you think that we will see the United States stand up to Israel and Netanyahu in a way that it hasn't in quite some time? Or do you think it's going to be kind of more of the same from the Trump administration? I guess I'm just asking you how do you see some of these negotiations kind of playing out going forward, and how do you see kind of Israel's role in that?
So I think Israel, look, Netanyahu is under tremendous political pressure right now from both his own right-wing government and the opposition. The big war, which involves both Lebanon and Iran, is seen in Israel as a military success and a massive political failure. Uh, so the military success only makes it worse for Netanyahu. People are saying, the brave IDF soldiers did their job, and you have not been able to make anything out of that. And in fact, you've been pushed around by Donald Trump. And so he is going to do everything he can to undermine the agreement, to stay in Lebanon, to try and find some way to, if not restart the war with Iran, maintain as much pressure as possible on Iran. I'm not sure how successful he is going to be at any of those things, but he's going to do all he can. I think with Trump right now, I think if Trump had to decide right at this moment, based on the things he's saying, I think he would be willing to put real pressure on Israel. The problem with Trump is that he is impulsive and incredibly moody. Tomorrow he may feel differently, and I think one of the reasons I think he would do it right now is that impulsiveness. I think he's angry at Israel. He is embarrassed by the fact that everybody on his side and the opposition know that he was tricked by Netanyahu, that Netanyahu sold him a bill of goods about what this war would look like, what the results would be, despite the fact that Iran telegraphed what its response, how it would respond to any attack. This is not, the fact that they closed the strait, the fact that they attacked the Gulf Arab infrastructure, particularly the energy infrastructure, and were ready to do much more. These were not surprise moves. Iran has warned for years and years that this is exactly how they would respond to an American attack, and he knows that he's been basically made a fool of, whether he's willing to admit it or not. Now tomorrow he may forget that. It may feel different to him tomorrow because that's just who he is. So, I wouldn't predict it, but I think I would say that we have a better chance of him actually standing up to Israel and telling Israel that he will take X, Y, and Z steps and meaning it if it doesn't pull out of Lebanon. I think we have a better chance with him, certainly than we did with Joe Biden, who was just ideologically opposed to any pressure on Israel, and really any president before him. It is one thing about him being a lame duck president who's about to lose Congress, and where his own base is angry that he got involved with this. I also think he's going to I think what's more likely is whether he stands with Israel or not, he's going to throw Israel under the bus. Which will have its own political ramifications. I have some concerns as a Jewish American what kind of ramifications that might have in that regard, but it will also have real ramifications in our politics. I think whatever choice he makes, he's going to do that, and we'll see how that resonates in future Congresses and with future administrations.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Mitchell, for chatting with us. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Glad to do it.